I was asked a while ago to identify the enemies of the American working class, so everybody that's not in the 1%, basically. And it was a really good question, and I had several ways in which I want to frame this, but I guess I would say picture a circle where you have in that circle a group of people who get away with offshore bank accounts, paying less money than people who are much more, poorer than they are. And then on the sides of them are media that they've bought out to not report on stories relating to their corruption slash actual expenses slash ways of getting around the law. And the other side on that circle is, or rather are, politicians, a majority of members of Congress, in fact, that take money from either defense contractors or these individuals as individuals and thereby vote in ways that make sure to increase their profit or at least not hurt the bottom line of those donors. And then on the other opposite side of this circle, so again, we have the 1% on that side over there, and then on both of these parts over here, you have the members of Congress who vote the way they want, and the media that doesn't talk about things that relate to them. The other part of that circle are those at the bottom. Now, you have to understand the U.S. and I made it clear in a couple of different streams, videos, whatever, that I'm not identifying with either party because both parties have been complicit in this in general. But again, going back to what I was saying, you have 43% of the homelessness working, so they have jobs. Almost half of the homeless that have an occupation. You have 63% of Americans that can't afford $1,000 emergency. It is it's a failed system. No one can look at this other than if they live in La La Land and say this was good. And it didn't start under Trump, so it's not me attacking him for no reason. It's been going on for at least a decade, but certainly before that because 2008 was when the banks crashed. But you get the idea that it's been something going on year after year that these politicians have contributed to. And speaking of the politicians, let me just clarify that there are 10 members of Congress that do not take money from these corporations and thereby are less likely to be complicit in these kind of votes. Obviously, Sanders is someone people mention regularly. You have Warren, better known in some circles by another name from a Disney character. You have Tulsi Gabbard, Keith Ellison, Beto O'Rourke, who's presently challenging Cruz for his Senate seat. Ro Khanna. There's a number of them, and I can't remember every single one, even though it's such a small group. But you get the idea that it's not. This is not a generalizing term. That being said, it's still a majority of the people we currently have in office, and they've created roadblocks to stop anyone from getting in on stopping their system. So, for example, one would say to themselves, well, all I need to do is, be known by everybody in my state to win, right? Well, you also have to remember that 9 times out of 10, the person who raises the most money wins the race. So when you have corporations being able to dispense millions of dollars at the drop of a hat versus, some unknown person living in Arizona or New York or in my state of California, you run into the problems I've just spoken about, that the system is designed to mess up anyone who's not part of it. It's a big, as I've said before, it's a big corporate gangbang, and you ain't in it. The other part of this is when you realize the owners of these various institutions. So, for example, you have Jeff Bezos, who made 40 billion this year, and literally, if he wanted to, could spend half of what he's made in this year alone to end homelessness, which would cost 20 billion. But he doesn't do that because he does not care about anyone that's downtrodden. And it's not even a matter of just being against the idea of having to spend your funds on those that you're not you don't feel responsible for. People that work at Amazon have had to have half their salary come from the taxpayer. Bezos is making the 30,000 that his employees do in 20 minutes. And if you wanted to make what he's made up to this point, you'd have to work for 4,000 years. So another person who, and look, these guys like Obama, Trump, whatever, they're not villains. Harris, Feinstein, these senators, they're not people who are evil. If I see them walking on the street, I'm not going to attack them or do anything physical. But they in their capacity as people enforcing policy are acting in an antagonistic way toward those at the bottom, because they've allowed many voters, whether they're Democrat or Republican, to think they're different, and then behind closed doors they vote the same way, as we saw with the defense bill I've brought up multiple times. And in the midst of this, you have a media that is paid out to keep quiet about this certain topic, such as that. So it's really a widespread thing of corruption where you have the media, the politicians, and the people at the top all working to make sure this system never changes. And the few people who are able to infiltrate that system, either by getting elected to office or by trying to report on these cases while being members of the media, are so far few and in between that most of us don't see it. I'll give you an example. You have 300 million people living in the United States. And one person could have, let's say, a YouTube video about this topic. Let's say this video got 1 million views, which it never will, but let's say it did. You would have people who say, wow, you really got your message out there, man. People have woken up to this. And you would go, wait a second. If there are 300 million people in the U.S., and only 1 million see this video or any video by anybody else about this topic, that's not even 1% of all the people who will be afflicted by this issue. Heck, if you went to my state of California, which has at least 30, it's either 38 or 39 million people living here, and you put that up against 1 million, it still isn't even a fifth of all the people who live here that are afflicted by these neoliberal corporatist policies that both Democrats and Republicans have been enacting. So it's a circle jerk where you just sit there and you have to kind of, you might meet 2, 3, 4, 5 people you talk to during the day and tell them about how this stuff is going. But there is a difficulty that people have in recognizing when both parties have worked together to screw them over, because they want to believe in this idea that they don't live in a society that is so corrupt and so evil that it would allow both parties to grandstand for different values. So you have the Democrats pretending they care about the LGBT community, even though, under Clinton's era, that was the Defense of Marriage Act. You have Republicans pretending to be in favor of getting rid of Roe versus Wade because they're so concerned with the lives of people, even though they allow 60+% of the U.S. to be poor. And they use these issues to trick you into thinking there is some semblance of difference between both sides when they're playing the same game of appealing to the same people and going out of their way to make sure you keep getting screwed year after year. So I hope this has answered that question and really solidified who the enemies of the working class are. And like I said before, they are not villains, but they are antagonistic in their practices. The free market that these conservatives often preach about has allowed corporations to get around with paying less money than they're required to by law, while the people at the bottom have to play the game fair and square. So there's law for poor people and no laws for rich people. Complete lawless society. And the only ways that it can be stopped, because Amazon is already so big a boycott would not work, is to get politicians in the highest levels of office to enact regulations that can ensure that these malpractices cease. But until that happens, which the rate that people are waking up is not quick enough, I don't see it occurring. But things could change, and I'm optimistic about long-term willingness to accept that this system is not how things have to be. If you go back to 60s, 50s, 40s, you didn't have this. And it's why when I see people who say this is the law of the land, this is what we have to accept, that's not true. It's a defeatist mindset that is engineered to keep you just believing that nothing could ever change. You know, if you had this video, for example, get shared and shown to 300 million people that, you know, that all live in the US, or just any number above that, as we've had videos on YouTube do so before, it could change because more people would know about it. More people would actually hear the message involved. So thank you for watching and stay safe.